So I would say that the number one most important thing to do is to work with the clinicians and have a good relationship. Data, I think, comes second, along with good project management skills to keep it rolling.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we're going to be speaking with a rising star, Heather Roadcap, who is out there on LinkedIn sharing her insights and best practices and her projects. That's how we found her. We're going to be talking about the Kanban methodology and specifically the two-bin inventory management system today, Hayes.
I learned a lot, I have to say. I didn't know much about this subject, to be honest, but Heather brings it. She has great energy. She knows a lot about it. She talks about what she's implemented recently, and it's really well done. So stick around, listen to her. I think you'll learn a lot.
Yep, lots of best practices, lessons learned, and insights coming up next with Heather Roadcap.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
We are speaking with Heather Roadcap, Director of Materials Management at St. Luke's, Kansas City. And Heather, we found you because you were touting the benefits of the Kanban inventory management system on LinkedIn, and you hadn't even launched it yet. And you were talking about how all the hard work had been put in place. You were getting ready to do it. And I jumped all over that, reached out to you and wanted you to come on and talk about how successful it was. And you said, well, wait a second. We actually have to launch it first. How about we hold off a couple of months? So now it's been a couple of months and we're excited to get your insights, not only pre-implementation and an overview for those out there that are not familiar with the Kanban methodology, but also to get your perspectives on some ways to make it successful and maybe even some opportunities for improvement or some blind spots for folks. So welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. I'm really excited to talk about Kanban.
It's going to be great. This is going to be so much fun. I'm going to learn so much because I can tell you I don't know much about Kanban, but I did do this. Gary, I'm going to quiz you right fast. Do you know what Kanban actually means? Do you know what the word is?
You can't even present it yet. You can't even speak it. What did you call it? Kanban? Kanban? What did you call it? I don't even know what you said, Hayes.
It's sign board. That's what it means. Did you know that?
We've used it many, many times in our executive leadership. If you had any boots on the ground, Hayes, within the director of supply chains, maybe you would be in the weeds. Why don't you come out one day with Heather and I and really see what it is? And
do work.
Floating up here. Get in there. Let's see it.
Roll my sleeves up is what you're saying, right?
I know you got it.
Absolutely.
I know you got it in you. I'm not stealing any thunder. I'm not stealing any thunder.
I'm here to learn.
So it means sign board. Is that what it is, Hayes?
That's what Siri said.
Okay, so Heather, we're going to have you talk about yourself here in a little bit, but does that make sense to your understanding of the application, the true meaning of Kanban? Is sign board something that resonates with you about how you implement it?
Absolutely. So Kanban started in Toyota lean manufacturing, and it really is all about creating a visual cue or a visual signal in your process. And so it translates to like billboard or visual signal or anything like that, anything that creates a visual cue in your process. So Hayes, he's on the mark.
Uh-oh, Gary. Uh-oh. All right. So, Heather, why don't you talk a little bit about your background before we dive into Kanban and specifically how you're, deploying this, because the methodology can be done in a lot of different ways, right? And you have a specific use case that you're going to be sharing with us today. But what's your background and experience, and then also specifically related to Kanban?
My path to healthcare supply chain started actually, I did an internship in clinical informatics and I needed a job after that. And I had a friend that worked in supply chain and she said, hey, I think you would really like the guy that you would be working for, so you should apply for this job. So I knew nothing about healthcare supply chain before getting into it. And I had the pleasure of working at my first organization where they already had a pretty robust Kanban implementation in their clinical areas. So in all of the nursing units. And that was really the first time that I saw Kanban. From there, I was a data analyst, but I did a lot of project management work within supply chain. Really loved the OR and procedural spaces, really felt that was my niche. Did a lot of continuous improvement, cost savings, workflow efficiencies there. I was then promoted to the manager over those areas, was able to grow my scope a little bit and wrap up with the cath lab and have them under my purview as well. Did that for a few years and then got promoted and offered a director position down here in Kansas City. And so down here in Kansas City, I am over all of supply chain at our hospital. So from shipping and receiving to inventory distribution in our central supply, equipment logistics, linen distribution, and all of the procedural areas in the hospital.
Wow. So inventory management is something very close to your heart then, obviously, because you are managing an enormous amount of products in different departments. And so, what is kind of the specific problem that you were trying to solve with this recent project? Like, let's narrow down that Kanban focus a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think everybody in supply chain right now in healthcare and probably everywhere, it's probably not just limited to healthcare supply chain, but we're all tasked with finding or creating savings right now. And savings are the byproduct of efficiencies. And so when I was creating my strategic plan at my organization, I said, how can I focus on workflow efficiencies? Because that is something that I really can control. There's really not a lot of barriers in improving that. And so I wanted to implement and roll out Kanban and trial it in some areas to see that if it would work for my team's workflows, but also to really improve some clinical integration and efficiencies there as well.
All right, Heather. So you're absolutely right. We're looking for efficiencies anywhere we can get them. Some of that's related to staffing. Some of it is because, the back order situation requires us to literally pivot so often. And, I'm just wondering, what specifically were you trying to solve, and what was the application of, the Kanban methodology in this case for this project?
Yeah. So specifically at my organization, when I walked throughout all of our PAR units, our nursing units, it really felt that we did not quite have the PAR and the reorder point set well. And that was causing a lot of confusion in stockouts. And so the idea that I had for my organization was that having a visual cue there with two bin, specifically two bin Kanban at my organization, it would really cut out that decision-making process and enable the staff to much more quickly flow through the rooms so that we can avoid some of those stockouts and clinical inefficiencies and dissatisfiers in the supply chain.
So I became aware of the two bin process probably about 10 years ago, but what are some other common applications of the Kanban methodology, right? Like two bin is just one of the ways to implement the methodology. What are some other common examples before Gary, who clearly wants to talk about two bin? I know nobody else can see his video, but he's almost feeling like I do. I just want to hear about other applications other than two bin, and then Gary, I'll let you jump in.
No worries, Justin. Thanks.
Yeah, so this is where I sound a little bit nerdy in supply chain, because I think it is so fun. There are so many different options, and everybody thinks, oh, supply chain, it's logistics, it's X, Y, and Z, but no, there's so much creative aspect to it as well. So Kanban, there are many different applications. You can do two bins front to back. You can do two bins stacked on top of each other. You can do actual, like it translates to billboard or visual sign. You can do a board. You can do paper cards. Even in our room that we did, there are items that are bulky, even though they're commodity supplies that are bulky, that don't make sense to put in bins. And so we have a visual cue for that as well with the reorder point and proper labeling. So there's a lot of different applications, and you can really make it work for whatever your situation is. And it's fun to be creative and to problem solve like that.
I just wanted to go back to the 2-bin because Heather, I'm old. I've been in this healthcare arena for a long time, and I've been nerding out for a long time. Our mutual friend, Jeff Stevens, we've been hanging out for a long time on the Kanban strategy. And just, I keep coming full circle, like coming back to the 2-bin, just the ease of being able to do it, just looking, your quantities are pretty equal. Take only what is needed. It follows the rules of the Kanban system. So do you see it more useful like 2-bin? I mean, you can get completely analytical overload and visual cues, but 2-bin, it seems simple. Like, come back and let's simplify it. So at least at a start, what's your thoughts on the 2-bin? I want to see your input on that.
Oh, absolutely. So 2-bin is the way that I prefer to do it. And my team will probably tell you I was very headstrong on that it had to be 2 bins front to back. And there's a few reasons for that. One is because when that front bin gets empty, that's your chance to wipe it out, right? We all have joint commission requirements, right? We have to keep our horizontal surfaces free of dust. So there's your cue to wipe it out and to keep that bin clean. But then also to make sure that you're rotating your stock between your A and your B bin, you're able to ensure with data that you're doing that. And then that also helps you avoid expiration in the future. So I think that 2 bins front to back is really the optimal way of doing it. Again, you can do it other ways and it can be very successful, but there's just a lot of built-in factors of 2 actual bins that make it optimal, in my opinion.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
That obviously really made Gary feel well. As you were describing it, Heather, I couldn't help but think Forrest Gump, with the barbecue shrimp, because you were going, you can put it on the front, you can put it in the back, put it on the side, you can do this, you can do that.
Shrimp Creole.
Barbecue, you can do it all. Grill. Fried. And I couldn't help but think that. But to your point, there's a ton of flexibility.
For sure.
So there's a little controversy, though, when it comes to the 2-bin Kanban methodology, which is colored bins. And so, Heather, can you kind of describe sort of the controversy and the debate around that, and maybe give us both sides of the debate, why people feel passionately one way or another?
Definitely. So, and maybe this controversy is just made up in my mind, but I am very opposed to having colored bins. Now, on the flip side,
I want to hear this. Yes,
we just
please.
talked about how it's very important to have visual cues, right? We're building in visual cues, and the colored bins, our clinical team does see they see the colored bins as a visual cue, right? So purple bins to them means wound care and ortho. They know that if they're looking for that product, they're going to go to those bins and they're probably going to find it. However, I don't like colored bins because you really can't see into them or through them. I implement all of my 2-bin Kanban rooms with clear bins because then it helps the supply chain team and the clinical team know if they're out of something to pull that bin and put it up top. There are people that are new to 2-bin and they don't know that they have to pull that bin out for it to be replenished. And so if it sits there empty and it's not being checked, in our ED where we went live with this, we have close to 500 SKUs. That's a lot of bins. That's a lot of items to be checking. So having that clear bin just is kind of a built-in check to be able to see and make sure that that bin is empty. I prefer to build in that visual cue of the category and the organization with colored labels, because then you can also change colored labels. When we implemented Kanban, we went to standard size bins. So we have 3 different standard size bins, and we can order those in bulk and get a really good deal on them because we know that those are the only bins we're going to be using. And we can always change the label. We can always order in different, colored labels or print them on different cardstock or anything like that. To me, it's just more efficient.
Agreed.
I like it. That makes sense to me. Yeah.
I thought Gary was going to bring the counterpoint, but
no.
We have a consensus on the Power Supply podcast.
Absolutely. I was thinking about it as she was speaking to it. I was going to, she said purple. Then I was like, well, blue is patient items and yellow is urinary products and red is blood. And I was going through it. And when she said she went to clear and she put the colored labels on it, I was in. I was right there. I just went efficiency, Kanban system, effective, lean, 5S, call it what it is. I'm on board. I think it's great. So there you go.
All right, Heather. So let's dive into the project and kind of like the key setup, right? I know we're going to talk about how it's all been going since you really launched it, but what were some of the things that you were working on to make sure that you were set up for success, and who did you have to talk to within the organization to help make sure that everybody kind of was aware of what the strategic plan was looking like?
I run my departments and everything that I do is clinically integrated and patient focused. And so I knew that the number one thing that I had to do was speak with the clinicians in that area, the nurse manager and director, to make sure that that fit with what they felt served their patients best. And we serve, in ancillary departments, we serve the patients by serving the clinicians well. So the first thing that I did was I created a slide deck about why I thought Kanban was awesome and it could really help in their area, and just educating the clinicians on what it was. And I asked for a meeting with them. And they're not new to me, right? We've worked together. At this point, we had worked together for a few months. And so we sat down and we talked about it. I brought in some bins. I showed some before and after pictures of organizations that have posted about Kanban, or things that I found on the internet, or things that I brought with me from my past organization. And we talked through it. And they had a lot of questions. It was very new to them. And we were able to effectively answer all of their questions, and they felt comfortable moving forward. We specifically chose the emergency department first because it's busy and it has a lot of velocity in their supply turnover. And so I knew that wanting this to be successful, to serve the clinicians well, I would eventually want to roll out to other areas. So I tried to choose the hardest area I could think of first, and that's definitely the emergency department.
If someone's listening to this right now and is thinking about doing it, is there 1, 2, 3 things that you're like, you've got to do this to roll it out effectively?
I think there's probably more than 3 things. It was a multi-step process, but definitely having a really good relationship with your clinical team and making sure that you guys are on the same page about what's going to work well in your organization, because there are some spaces that traditional tube and Kanban, it doesn't work in. You're limited by space. You have too many SKUs. You have maybe more physician preference items that are not commodity that just don't work well in that model. So making sure that it does fit the area that you're working within, being clinically integrated, letting them know that this is really, it's serving them. We're going to reduce your stockouts. We're going to avoid expiration dates, which is a huge potential risk to patients. We're able to clean up your item master. We're able to, in the emergency department, there were clinical resource nurses that were ordering in specialty supplies that my associates were not managing. So we've now been able to add those in, and we've taken the burden off supply chain from those clinicians, and now we fully own that area. So I would say that the number one most important thing to do is to work with the clinicians and have a good relationship. Data, I think, comes second, along with good project management skills to keep it rolling.
So low turn, high inventory is definitely a recipe for disaster here, is what I'm hearing from you. But in some cases, it could be an optimization effort and a standardization effort, right? That could flip you from, hey, this doesn't work because we've just got, too many different SKUs because of a lack of standardization. But somebody could be listening to this thinking, man, we're taking up all this space already with inventory, and there's no way we can do 2 bins because there's just too many bins and too little inventory in each of them. But we know that there's a standardization opportunity that could be worked into this project, or would it just be a separate project leading up to it?
Absolutely. We did standardization as part of this as well. First of all, the first thing we did was measure the room to really make sure that the 2 bins would work. And we did like a linear estimation, and we actually found that we would gain more space. We had the louvered panels on the wall with hanging bins, and we were out of space. There was no way, no how we were adding any more product to that room, even though they had been requesting it. So we actually gained space through this project. We ran usage. So not only did we pull what we had in their item master for that area, but we also ran usage to see what they were special ordering or one-off ordering, to add that in. And then we worked with the clinical resource nurses to standardize, and then also create par levels. So we were able to run 6 months of usage and create an average daily usage to create par levels that would accommodate their area.
Heather, you brought up a really good point. First of all, taking on the ED as one of the most hardest ones initially, I applaud you for that. And then I was thinking about sutures. But the point you made was bringing in I think you said the clinical coordinators were ordering. Is that correct, Heather? Was the title you said?
The clinical resource nurses, yeah.
Yeah, the clinical resource nurses. So the transparency piece, how important was that? Like including everybody as part of the Kanban system, is that transparency of you just showing the data, you letting them know how you can help them, that openness, that's a benefit of that. I was like, how instrumental was that in getting everybody on board? I just wanted you to talk about that for a second.
Yeah, having that transparency with the clinical team that you're serving it's got to be priority number one, no matter what project you're rolling out or what you're implementing. It doesn't matter. You have to have that transparency. We try to stay as clinically integrated as possible. And so every step of the way, basically, so step one was measure the room and then educate the clinicians. Step 3 was build the racks and mock it up and then bring the clinicians down to give their opinion. So basically every other step, we brought them back in. And we said, hey, what are you guys thinking so far? And once we had every item pulled, we had everything we thought, based on the data that they needed in their room. And we had it all mocked up and we pre-categorized it for them. We gave them a week. And actually it took them about 2 weeks, where they just went through and reorganized as they saw fit. And they changed whatever they wanted because it has to work for them. If the clinical team isn't comfortable with where their needles are and they're starting 90 IVs a day, that's a dissatisfier, and it's bringing down the level of patient care. And we have to think about the community that we're serving first, and work that into everything that we're doing within supply chain. So it's instrumental. It's got to be priority number one.
What type of ROI are you seeing? Is it caregiver satisfaction? Is it literally a better return on supplies, or a little bit of both?
A little bit of both. And to be quite honest, at first it is a dissatisfier because it's completely reorganized and they have to relearn where everything is. However, it's organized much better. It's all categorized together, all of your needles together, all your syringes together, all your anesthesia items together. So they're quickly able to get the flow of it. But it's anytime you make a change, right? Our brains are wired against change. But we, from a materials management perspective, we were spending 3 to 4 hours per day managing this room between the initial stocking order, delivering the supplies, stocking the bins. Sometimes you don't have the same person delivering the supplies that had ordered them. And then you're hunting and pecking for where's this empty bin? Where's this supply? Maybe I'm not familiar with the room. And then also a LUM order that comes in that we were doing in the evening. So we were spending a lot of time managing the room, and we've been able to reduce that now to about an hour. So it's definitely cut down on the time that we are spending in the room. And it also is cutting back on the amount of special orders or stockouts that they're calling us down and telling us about. So there's definitely been ROI. We're not at the 45-day mark yet, and that's when we're reconvening to go over all the data. But there's been ROIs from both sides, from the materials management perspective and then also from clinical workflow. Right.
That's great.
You said you're not quite at the 45-day mark, which is when you're going to be doing, I guess the way I'm hearing it is you're going to bring in the data, and that's going to be the first time where everybody's really going to look at it, provide feedback, and even if their perception is that it hasn't made a big difference, you'll have something to show what the impact has been through multiple KPIs that you might have established at the beginning. And I'd love to talk about the KPIs after this question, but first, I'm kind of wondering, how long will this go on, right? So you're 45 days, post go live, you're about to look at this data. How long will the project continue? So assuming that the trial is successful and that everybody's bought into it and that they understand that this is the best case workflow for all parties, what we would then do is transition to a quarterly review. This is, again, in my opinion, best case for PAR analysis, because then at every quarter, we're reviewing how their inventory is turning. Maybe there are items that haven't been reordered the entire quarter. And then we can talk about reducing the PAR level or potentially removing it. Again, that goes into your expiration avoidance, removing items from your inventory, reducing your carrying costs. So that's how it would transition out of the project stage and then just into the last S, right? Like we're sustaining it. That would be how we would sustain it. And then we would do the same thing, and then we would roll it out starting in the ICUs next, because those are the next kind of most volatile with highest velocity are ICUs. We do plan on meeting at the 45-day mark to just kind of do a full overview of how the project went,
from our initial meeting, from educating them to every step along the way, we did have some delays and some pushbacks. And so we want to review those and dig into them and say, hey, what was it that caused this and how can we avoid it next time? Is there a way that we could have served the clinical team better? Is there a way that we were too thorough in some aspects? Did we have some analysis paralysis where we didn't move as quickly as we should have because of that? So we'll go over all of that at the 45-day mark, get some really good feedback, and then move it forward from there.
Heather, do you want to put anybody on blast that really pushed back? You just want to say something
Honestly, I truly feel so blessed to work with my team, my supply chain team, but also my administrators, the executives, and then also the clinical team, because I said, hey, I have this idea. I've seen it work really well in the past. I want to run with it here. And they said, please, by all means, go for it. We have a high level of trust with each other, and everybody at my organization has the patient in mind and the community that we serve in mind and tries to stay very positive through changes. And so from that perspective, like as a supply chain director, there's nothing more that you could ever ask for than the trust of the clinicians that you're working with. And I have that, and I feel very thankful to have that. So no, nobody goes on blast. Nobody really gave me a hard time. In fact, they were saying, hey, can you move it quicker? Can we get this rolled out quicker? We want to see it. So there's a lot of support.
That says you're doing something right there. Great job.
I think the sustainability piece and that quarterly review cannot be overemphasized. It's like you can set these up, and how many times do we start a project? We launch it and everybody's, there's some people that may be hesitant, but everybody's kind of starting to become believers and they love it. And then all of a sudden, the ownership transfer or something happens and the sustainability of it stops. And the next thing you know, you go back and look at the beautiful project that you set up and it's fallen apart. And then everybody's frustrated by it. And you can't even hit the reset on the project because now everybody's got sort of like this bad view or opinion of the process, and it wasn't really the validity of the process. It's just the lack of the effort to maintain it later. And you emphasize that quarterly review was a best practice. It 100% is, because things do fall apart pretty quickly without some level of ownership and oversight on an ongoing basis. I think probably that's one of the most important ones. I did ask you a little bit about KPIs, and we've just got a few minutes left here, but I want to give you an opportunity to sort of add to that, because I'm assuming if you're preparing for this 45-day review, you've got some key metrics that you're about to share. What are they?
We honestly tried to keep it simple with the KPIs. We are planning on doing, you've got your hard data and then your soft data, like the feelings of it. So we are planning on surveying the clinical team to get their opinions and see how they feel about it, because that's important. Every day when you go into work and if you don't like the way that you're pulling supplies and you're caring for patients and it's turning, that's important. But we are also looking at stockouts. And so we track that by the number of calls and stock issue orders that we have to do in the area. We're also going to be looking at inventory turns, how quickly those bins are turning. Did we get the par levels correct? And then we're also looking at that workflow efficiency piece. And so, is it taking our staff the appropriate amount of time that we had anticipated for this area? And is it gradually decreasing from what we were doing prior to? So those are the big ones that we're tracking.
I love the fact also that you said you kept it simple with the KPIs, because, that's part of the ongoing management and the sustainability. If your KPIs are numerous, it can also become very difficult to figure out which ones are the most important. And it becomes this area of like, well, what's really valuable? And when you get a little ways down the road, you lose sight of the actual purpose. So I think keeping KPIs simple and targeted is another really excellent best practice. The only other thing, that I would kind of throw out there before we wrap up is, you talked about where you were headed next, right? There's some other areas. I think you said the ICU, correct? But, if somebody is kind of thinking about putting this in place, you said the emergency room is a great place to start. But are there other common areas? You've been with a few different organizations that people could maybe start in. Like, let's say they're like, yeah, the emergency room is not so bad where we are. We've kind of got that figured out. Where would be some other departments or applications that is there just, and also manageable? Because if somebody doesn't have experience with this, they don't want to bite off this really huge project as they're trying to implement it for the first time and understand it. So what are some good things to keep in mind for those people who want to try this for the first time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's going to be a little bit subjective. So if you have experience doing Kanban and working with 2-bin Kanban before, there's probably no limits to what you can do with it. So we've also started implementing 2-bin Kanban we have a cardiovascular OR that has 6 ORs. And so we are transitioning, and we've started with all of our anesthesia supplies because those are they're specialty, but they're commodity in a way. They're used throughout the hospital. So we've done that in a 2-bin Kanban fashion, but specifically just for like nursing units. I would say just look at probably the best place to start if you don't have experience doing it is looking at a room that you have that has enough space that you feel confident working within, that you have the trust of the clinical team, maybe a low turning area, an area that doesn't have a lot of inpatient turnover. And then also looking at the SKU count. So how many unique items do you have in that room, and how quickly are you going to be able to implement that project? Because if you start a project and then 8 months later, you still haven't implemented it and you're not into that sustaining, you're going to lose trust within your clinical team. So I think it's going to be the right mixture of all of those things in determining where it's appropriate for you to start.
Really well said. Good job. Good job, Heather.
You got anything you want to add?
I learned a lot.
Anything you want to add before we wrap? Because I think you covered it very well.
No, I think, if I had any parting, words of wisdom, it's just to not get discouraged along the way, because there are going to be setbacks in your project. You have to feel very confident that this is the right direction for you. There's going to be glitches with the data, right? Where you didn't get the average daily usage right and you're stocking out of a certain bin, but then you can just go back and reanalyze it. So think clearly, think concisely, try to move through it as quickly and efficiently as you can. Keep the patient and the clinicians in the center of everything that you do. Your supply chain team, it's got to work for them as well. And I don't really think that you can go wrong, whether it's 2-bin Kanban that you're implementing or flashcard style Kanban or any kind of workflow efficiency. As long as you keep the patient and your team in mind, I think it will be successful.
Heather Roadcap, everybody. Heather Roadcap, Director of Materials Management at St. Luke's in Kansas City, joining us to talk about Kanban inventory management system and the 2-bin application. Even highlighted a little bit of the colored bin controversy for us, Gary. And so you've got some experience in the weeds, as you said during this discussion, implementing a 2-bin process. And, I just think the more we talk about some of the more granular stuff, we have lots of high-level conversations on the podcast, but really applying some of these concepts, keeping the KPIs simple, making it sustainable with quarterly reviews after go live, just some of the key takeaways from the discussion today.
No, Justin, I think you summarized it well. She sold me on the 2-bin. And when she said no colors, I was kind of like, where's she going with this? She talked about clear and color coded and how she made those visual cues as part of the Kanban system. I was like, game on. I'm in. I think it's great because there's still entities out there. There's still hospitals. There's still critical access hospitals, ASCs. They're still not doing it perfect. No one will ever say they're doing it perfect. So keeping it simple too, I think, is a big point. Heather had some really, really good points to share, and I think she's going to go a long ways. And so really good conversation about the Kanban system and her implementation in the ED. Really, really enjoyed it.
Well, we found Heather because we were on social media and she was sharing her experiences there. And I just love seeing people who are active helping make the industry better, and we definitely wanted to give her a platform for sharing that insight, and you should take advantage of it too. Definitely follow Power Supply on LinkedIn and Facebook. Make sure that you're commenting. Maybe there was something about this discussion today that you want to add something, then comment on the post. Or maybe there was something that was a great takeaway for you. Oh, I've tried this before, but I didn't consider X, and if I had, maybe it would have been more successful. I'm going to try it again. Those kinds of engagement really help get the discussion going. And I'll also say, if this really helped you and you end up going out and implementing the 2-bin Kanban methodology, we'd love to hear. So maybe you share this out in 2 or 3 months and talk about how that went for you and that you heard Heather's insights today on this episode. Would just love for that engagement to happen on social media. You can also download our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. And if you're a little bit more of a private person, you can send an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We'll definitely respond to those, but at the very least, subscribe to our newsletter by visiting our website and clicking in the bottom left of the homepage to sign up for the newsletter. Put in your email address. You'll get weekly updates from us there. And on behalf of Hayes, Gary, and myself, thanks for listening to this episode of Power Supply.